Hey, Heather. So today we have a very special guest here. Her name is Heather. And what piques my interest about Heather is really that Heather is a registered nurse in ICU, right? And then you went on to you stopped becoming a nurse, and then you went on to become this stress management coach that took on a lot of expertise. You are an NLP coach master, you are an mindfulness-based stress reduction facilitator. And yeah, how did you come on to this? How did you stop becoming a nurse and went on to do all these things?
So I actually still identify as a nurse. I
Okay.
just am no longer an ICU nurse. And so the reason why is because when I was working in the ICU, I worked in the ICU for both adults and children. And what I was noticing is the adults were coming in with a lot of illnesses that could have been prevented if they knew how to better manage their stress. Because stress is linked to so many different illnesses and
Mm-hmm.
chronic diseases. And so I was starting to see that if I really wanted to impact people's health, I had to get out of the reactive side of medicine and
Mm-hmm.
start proactively showing people how to prevent an ICU visit. Because although I really love the work there, I would rather no one ever have to go there. And so that started the learning about stress and the stress response in the body, because in the ICU, there aren't many other situations where you can be that stressed and your body can go through that level of stress. So there's a lot of research centered in that space that I learned from, and then learning other ways to prevent and manage that stress by learning how to turn off that stress switch, because our modern day stressful lives aren't what our body was designed to handle. So we have to learn how to navigate that new system that we're living in.
I'm still curious. Is stress a big thing that people working in the medical field talk about? Like, this is what I'm.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Because a lot of times, sometimes when you go to the doctors, they don't really talk about stress that much. Like, and I guess people think it's there, so people don't really talk about it. Is that the case?
That's it. And I think there's also a little bit of shame around it
Yes.
because we feel like we should know how to live our lives in a way that isn't stressful. But the truth is our lives aren't designed that way. Societies aren't designed that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the World Health Organization has identified stress as an epidemic. And it's been notified as an epidemic for years. And I'm in Canada, but there's tons of good statistics that come out of the US. So the
Mm-hmm.
US has this stat where they've noticed that 90% of visits to family doctors are because of a stress related issue.
Right.
And
Yes.
it's just pervasive, it's everywhere.
I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. I always thought it's somewhere about 70 to 90, but yes. I mean, like 10% walk into the clinic and nine out of that 10% sitting inside a waiting room could have been negated if they, just take care of themselves more. And
Absolutely. But then there's also all this pressure on us now because we are in a society that doesn't want to just allow us to wait to get sick and go seek help. We're now supposed to know all about nutrition and exercise and balance and how to prioritize things without being taught how to do this.
no, we were definitely never, no, I don't think we were taught a little bit about nutrition, but that's about it. And the kind of food that the school sells, back then, even when we were younger kids, I mean, they weren't exactly the most nutritious things around. So
No.
yeah, and we were never really taught how to take care of ourselves. So why do you, what's the biggest aspect when it comes to stress? Because I see you talk a lot about self-talk, right? Is that
Mhm.
a huge part of it? You would say all of it?
So, with all of the research I've done over the past decade into this space, is that there are two main sources of stress.
Okay.
The lifestyle that we're living, this fast forward world that's always connected, that's one of
Mm-hmm.
the main sources of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other is our inner critic. Because our inner critic, our ego, whichever methodology you subscribe to, that being inside of us is very fear based.
Mm.
And they like things to stay the same. The status quo is safe because it's known. And when there's anything that steps out of that status quo, our inner critic runs around our brain and pushes all the panic buttons and ramps up our stress response, which then has our body working against us to create even positive change. positive change is seen in the same way. And then our inner critic also pipes up with everything they can think of to make us stop and go back to normal. So any kind of stressful stimulus that we see, or any kind of change that we try to create ourselves, even if it's logically, we know it's positive change, our inner critic still responds to it in the same way as a bear chasing us. Our body and our inner critic, our psyche, responds to stress in the same way.
And then it would be like, there's a bear everywhere all the time. Is that what
That's
it is?
Like we have,
Yeah.
our stress response system is actually very simple. It's either on or off. And so we're either safe and everything's the same, or things are different and it's dangerous and we need to get away from it, or to fight it, or to figure out a way around it. And our body can't tell the difference between stressors like money or work or a pandemic and a bear.
Yeah.
Our body sees those all as the exact same. And so that's where understanding how to operate that stress switch, and then also how to take back control from your inner critic, is where the power really lies in overcoming our stress and our risk of stress-related illnesses.
I'm going to come back to the inner critic in a short bit, but I'm interested to hear what you say. Do you think there's such a thing as good stress? Eustress, right? That's what they call it.
Yes, exactly. So stress is necessary for life. Otherwise, we would be bored out of our minds, non-stimulated into sitting on the couch all the time.
Yeah.
So there is happy stress, and even the research acknowledges this eustress, EUSTRESS. And there's a study that was done which created this assessment, the stress risk assessment, where you look at the past 2 years of your life and you look at all of these main stressful events that could have happened in those past 2 years. And then based on the event, you get a score. And then that score predicts your risk of having a stress-related illness in the near future. And when you look at those lists, things on the list are like getting married, having a baby, moving into a new house. And these are really exciting things, but they still elicit some stress in your body. And starting a business, starting a new job, meeting new people, all of these things can still turn on that stress response. And so that's where like understanding how it works in our body can help us cope, to know like, I'm experiencing good stress right now, so I want to make sure that I don't allow this good stress to stay in my body. So I move through the stages of stress to the point where my body can't cope anymore.
And you would experience the same kind of stress-related issues even though you're going through this happy stress.
That's it. Your body just ramps up the stress response. It turns on that stress switch and starts moving through the stages of stress, regardless of what the cause is. Because our body is very, very simple in some ways. It just knows, okay, this is stress. This is what I do.
And it's the mind that is so complicated, right? At the end of the day, the body is really a simple mechanism. This is so interesting because there are people who accept that they're stressed, and then there are people who will live in some sort of denial. No, I'm not stressed, even though the situation they're going through is really stressful, not in a good way. And then there are people who are going through happy stress, and then they get all this eczema issues, like you said, even though they're going to get married, they have eczema breaking out, and then we talk a little bit about stress, and then they're like, no, we're not stressed. We're getting married, or I just moved to a new place. It's great over here. And then you get all these issues coming out at the same time. So this is really important that people should know about this.
Absolutely. And there's actually some really fascinating research that came out in 2012. And so this study was done by the University of Wisconsin. And so they looked at a group of 30,000 people. So it was a very good sample size. And what they did is they had everybody rate their current level of stress from low to high. And then they followed them for the next 8 years to see who died. And so the bad news first was that the people who rated their stress levels of being high had a 43% increased risk of dying. But there was a twist, because they also asked everybody, how do you perceive stress? Do you see stress as helpful or harmful? And what was really interesting was the people who rated their stress levels as high, but saw their stress response as helpful, had no increased risk of dying at all. And they actually did better than the people who rated their stress as low, but still saw it as harmful. So what they learned then by extrapolating this data is that it's not stress that causes the harm, it's the belief that stress causes harm.
And the
Because
perspective that comes with it, of course.
exactly, because when you can see it as helpful, there was another study done a couple of months later out of Harvard where they put people through a very stressful situation. It's called the Try Your Social Stress Test. So you have to start off by jumping on stage in front of some judges and adjudicators and giving a 5-minute impromptu speech on your personal flaws. And then you get whisked off into a room, right? And then you get whisked off into a room where now you have to start subtracting by 7, starting at 963. And the judge the entire time is like making faces at you and being like, oh, gosh, you're so bad at this. The other person was so much better than you, while you're trying to do this mental math. And then you get out into this room where they then show you words that are written on a page in different colors. And you have to say what the color of the word is without saying the word. And the words are all written in these very harmful statements that like, you are stupid and worthless. And you've got to say like, okay, so the first one's written in yellow, the next one's written in blue. So they put people through this awful stress test, which like just stresses me out by thinking about it.
Yes.
And what they looked at was the people that they taught about the stress response and how it's helpful. Those people, the little blood vessels around our heart when we're stressed out usually shrink and get really tight and tiny. And it's a survival mechanism. It's meant to help us. But that's what leads to diseases like heart attacks and cardiovascular disease and strokes. But the people who were taught to see the stress response as helpful, those little vessels around their hearts didn't close at all. They stayed nice and open and protected their heart. And this is what we see when people are experiencing joy and courage. So by shifting your perspective on stress, you're actually potentially extending your life and preventing yourself from getting a heart attack or a stroke earlier in life.
So people who went through this research, who approached this research in a, like, this is a great challenge for me to go through. I'm courageous, I'm brave enough to do this. They fare better, even though the adrenaline is high, I would assume this.
Exactly. Yeah, they still had the same high blood pressure, the same fast heartbeat, the same other signs that we see, like the dilated pupils and the faster breathing. They still had all of those other symptoms, but their heart protected itself because they knew that this was helpful, which is fascinating.
Yes. I've not heard of that. That is really, really fascinating. And to think that you would, because the normal parameters are your blood, your blood pressure, your heart rate, and of course the cortisol levels and all that. And who would have thought to measure the blood vessels around the heart, and the heart protected itself.
Isn't that amazing?
And that goes on to say that I think somebody's mentioned this, that we as human beings, we're really in for survival. We really do everything we can to protect ourselves. So like in the event that you have a migraine, it's really knocking you out because you need to rest, and then you cannot do anything else, and then therefore you go to bed and sleep, right? Because you needed that rest. So yeah, that is such a fascinating research. When you were in ICU, did you see a lot of people coming in with like things that come on from good stress? Like, do they come in with, they were actually in a happy place before that, and then they come in with a heart attack? Was there such a thing?
Yes. And unfortunately, this is where certain people are at more risk for this. So the high achieving variety, raising my hand because I'm one of those, the people that push themselves really hard, the people that want to be there, people pleasers also generally fall into this category. And so there's been a lot of research into this space now, linking diseases like multiple sclerosis and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, to this kind of prolonged eustress. And so that's where understanding the stages of stress are really important. So stress, our body moves through 3 different stages. So the first stage is called the alarm stage. That's the holy smokes, there's a bear running at me, I got to get away stage. And that's what your body was designed for. That's what your stress response was designed for. That quick run away from a bear, get out of there kind of response. But modern day stress doesn't work like that. And so that's why we started to learn about these other stages. So the next stage, when our stressors don't go away, is we move into the stage of resistance. And so this is ideal. This is where Eustress is perfect because it's keeping us, just a little bit stressed. We're pushing ourselves a little bit, but our body's coping. That's
Mm-hmm.
when our cortisol levels are an appropriate level. We're still able to sleep really well. Our body's supporting us through this increased moments of stress. And that's where our body can manage that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't do things to allow our body to recover, allow us to rest a little bit and get out of the stage of resistance for a little while, then we move into that final stage of stress, which is the stage of exhaustion. And that's where your body is unable to cope. Your body's unable to support you through that increased need for energy, because in the stress state, our body's running through energy so much faster. And that's what cortisol's job is. Cortisol gets such a bad rep in the media as being this awful, damaging hormone, but really it's the superhero, because it's running around giving everybody a pep talk. It's making sure that you've got the energy that you need. It's talking to your liver to make it start making its own energy. It's trying to help support you through the stage of resistance. But we've just got to be able to see those triggers, those markers that are indicating that we're moving past resistance and into exhaustion, to know that, okay, I need to step back, even on my eustress right now, to make sure that I'm giving my body a chance to catch up.
What are some of these triggers? Like, what are some of the more common triggers you would say before they move on to the exhaustion stage?
Great question. So what people often notice first is their digestion kind of gets a little off. Because when you're running away from a bear, digesting that cheeseburger that you had for lunch is not a priority. So your body shunts the focus away from that space. And so it's going to be then sending blood to other areas. And that means that your stomach is suffering. It's not getting as much. And so a lot of people see indigestion as the first stage. So then the next thing that we see often is people start to lose sleep. And this is because of our cortisol cycle. So cortisol is a naturally occurring hormone. It occurs in everybody's body, regardless of whether you're stressed or not. It's our wake me up hormone. So it usually peaks sort of around 5 to 6 in the morning, waking us up generally during our normal circadian rhythm. For most people, it's usually between 6 and 7 a.m. And then it starts to decrease throughout the day. And then sort of midway through the night, it starts to increase again. So that way it's at a peak level that it can trigger us to wake up. But the problem is when we're in this increased stress state, our cortisol levels are higher than normal. And then that means that our cortisol levels do drop throughout the day, and they get to a point where we'd be able to fall asleep. But then when they start increasing, sort of at 1 a.m, they hit that wake me up state hours before it's supposed to.
Right.
And so then we wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and it's hard to fall back asleep because our body's getting the signal it's time to wake up. So struggling to sleep through the night is the next early sign of exhaustion.
Right. So digestive system, that's the first normally to come about, and then the sleep issues.
Yeah, those are 2 really good early warning signs. The other thing that people say to me as we're sort of uncovering when they started to move into the stage of exhaustion is they started to get very irritable with other people. And they just don't know why. They're not an irritable person, but things just started to grate on their nerves like they've never experienced before. And that again is because of the stress response, and because a bit of the lack of sleep, but also because, again, when you're running away from a bear, contemplating the meaning of life or solving a complex problem, not a priority. You're trying to focus on those instinctual things. So when we're in that state for a long time, we kind of lose access to our more objective self, our higher thinking self. And that's why we can jump quickly to conclusions, and why we can start making assumptions and get more irritated by things, because it's going against our instincts at the moment to have those things be happening to us.
Right. And you mentioned a certain sort of personality that is more prone to stress. Is that right?
That's right.
And these are what people would normally call the type A type? Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which, can you talk a little bit more? Yes, go ahead. Talk a little bit more about the type A.
So type A people are definitely up there because we have high expectations of ourselves. We expect a lot of ourselves, and we've been trained to do this. Type A personalities don't pop out of anywhere. They're created. And so this comes from our programming as we're growing up, what we've been modeled from our parents and our teachers. And it also comes from experiences. So when we were younger, maybe we had an experience that showed, oh, I wasn't prepared for this, and I really didn't like that feeling. So I'm going to do everything which I can to not have to react in that state, to not have my stress response speak up. So now, as I'm growing into an adult, and then as I move through adulthood, I'm going to keep working on making sure that I'm controlling as many things as possible to avoid that stress feeling again. And so people that are feeling really driven, often it comes from childhood experiences and what was modeled there. But then also people that are quick to burn out are the nurturers, the caregivers, the ones that think of everybody else before they think of themselves. Because you are giving of your energy and putting stress on your body and ignoring all of the signs that you're moving out of resistance and into exhaustion, because everybody needs you. And so you're so much more focused on them than on yourself.
And I think we're never really, why do you think it's a reason that we don't really take so much care or notice about this kind of things that are going on with us? Like, you know, when we talk about the nurturers, why don't we nurture ourselves? Or the type A people, do they nurture themselves then? No, right? Because it's always about go, 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 go.
That's it. So sometimes type A people are very good at nurturing themselves because they have such a regulated schedule that like the gym gets in every morning and they just don't make space for it necessarily. So maybe they don't have enough rest time to really do it. So they're stressing themselves out in a different way. But from like the nurturers, and why we learn to not put ourselves first is because we were taught that being selfish is wrong. We've started to associate this word selfish with being not okay, not ideal. And there's many different cultures that have different perspectives on this, because we all want to be like rising to what our society expects from us. So like the Japanese culture has a big focus on modesty. That's a very strong value in Japanese culture. And to the point that people will say, well, I'm more modest than they are. So we're still stacking ourselves against other people, comparing this main value. And in other societies, like in the North American society, it's very much pushing to make sure that you are giving of yourself. You shouldn't be selfish. Being selfish is seen as wrong. And this is where I think choosing our words carefully as we start to shift these perspectives is really important. Because, like, for example, when we're on a strict diet and we decide to give ourselves a cheat day, we have all kinds of associations and labels that we've assigned to the word cheating, because you're growing up showing that cheating is wrong. You don't cheat on a test. You don't cheat when you play a game with your friends. Those things are not right. And so then when you're saying these words to yourself, oh, I'm going to be cheating on my diet, your body internalizes that in a chemical way that, okay, so what we're doing right now is wrong. And then those feelings of guilt may start coming up for us. And so when we think about putting ourselves first, we see that as selfish, which then we see as wrong, which then brings on all of those chemical balance that make us feel like this isn't right. We shouldn't be doing this. And so I think we need to start shifting the perspective of prioritizing yourself doesn't mean that you're not caring for others. It just means that you're finding balance that didn't exist before.
And I feel this is so important for people to hear this, because there's always so much guilt around taking care of yourself that, you know, when you stress, you are in a weaker position than other people because, you know, we all run at the same pace together. Why do you need to rest? You know, that kind of mentality, right? This is, and the words, my goodness, where do I even start on this? The words we talk, they're so powerful. And then, yes, so which brings me back to the self-talk, right? So that's guilt. Is that right? Is that, because I kind of feel like everything is tied together in that sense. The guilt, the self-talk, the wanting to be useful in the society, the self-worth. Is that correct? What
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely tied together. And again, all of our self-talk programming, we've been taught, we've been shown how people, our parents, how they talk to each other when there was a challenging situation, how we hear them mutter under their breath and the things that they'd say to themselves, how they model to us how they should be treated by other people. We see all of these things. And so like there's this talk about generational trauma, and it's very big in the spiritual woo-woo space. But the truth is it's also grounded in modern psychology, because we can see how these inherited patterns are moving down generation to generation, how we talk to ourselves, how we treat our bodies, how we were modeled for overcoming challenges. As a child, how are you supposed to know any different? And then as an adult, unless you're bringing awareness to these things and choosing to identify the programming that is either helpful or unhelpful and how to change those unhelpful patterns, unless you're acknowledging that, you're just going to keep following the same program. You have no choice but to follow the same program.
What would you say, I always feel like acknowledgement is such a huge, like it's that jump that you have to do in order to heal, right? And what would you say to someone who cannot see what they're going through now, and then they come to you and then they say like, I have so many things, but yet I want to achieve so many things, and why me? And how do you bring that acknowledgement to that person?
So in order to move through that space, you have to help guide that person to understanding that they don't want to stay stuck. And that can be very challenging to do,
So
because
challenging.
like we've talked about with our inner critic and with our stress response, our body likes things to stay the same.
Yes.
And when we start thinking about like, oh, I kind of want to assess, like, do I actually like this? Your body's gonna be like, yes, you do. Everything's fine. This is great. So your body's gonna work against you to help you stay stuck. So it is a scary leap to start doing some of that self-reflection. But my best suggestion is when you hear those little flickers of thoughts that are just like, surely there must be more to life than this, listen to those. Because that is your inner objective observer. That is your true self trying to reach out to be like, it can be different. Listen, it's worth it.
And it's that moment of catching it, right? When you say this kind of things, which takes so much awareness. And you have had you are trained in so many modalities, would I say so? Yeah, and I'm just so amazed at that. How many years did you take for all of this? Or are you still going through certifications and learning? Oh my goodness.
So I am a student of life. I will always be learning, always be growing and expanding, because like the research keeps coming out, new discoveries keep happening. So you have to continue to be curious. Curiosity is the best thing you could ever cultivate in yourself.
Definitely, I agree.
So absolutely. But it was a progression. I didn't jump into all of this at once and overwhelm my body and move me into my stage of exhaustion. But definitely the more that you learn, the more doors open, and you're just like, ooh, I really want to learn about that. And then another door opens, and you're just like, ooh, how about that? So that's where all of these certifications have just happened naturally, because after one comes another curiosity, and you're just like, okay, so now I really want to learn about hypnosis. That sounds fascinating, how we could reprogram our mind from the subconscious side, because what a great supplement to the cognitive behavioral therapy side that comes at it from the conscious space. So now we're attacking this programming from both sides and healing it that much faster. So anything which you can do to help speed up that process I'm on board with that.
No, I totally get you. Like, I'm so interested in all these things as well, and it has crossed my mind to learn more about all these other modalities. But how would you guide a person through what type of modality to use then, in your case? Like, this person comes in with, type A, um, into that state of exhaustion, because I would think that's when they come and look for you, right? They would be in the stage of exhaustion already. And then I'm going to ask, how does exhaustion look like? But yeah, which modality, and how would you decide what's best for this person? Like, I mean, I imagine it's definitely a two-way process. But for the listeners listening in, then, how do I decide what type of modality suits me most then? And of course, how does the exhaustion stage look like? That's one thing I forgot to ask you just now.
Absolutely. So let's start there. So exhaustion is when getting up off the couch to get yourself a glass of water seems like the biggest task. To think about dragging yourself into work, to try your best to be nice to other people, just feels like this enormous ask. And you feel like you don't have the desire to do anything anymore that used to bring you joy. You just feel like everything is drained out of you. You feel like you got nothing left to give and you don't know how to fix it. People often experience a lot of health problems at this point. This is where a lot of anxiety really starts to show up, a lot of panic attacks, a lot of depression, because you are acknowledging that this is not what you want for your life. How did I let myself get here? And so then there's also a lot of self-blame that goes along with that, but then a lot of prolonged digestive issues, a lot of high blood pressure, a lot of headaches, things along those lines that really bring people down to the stage of exhaustion where their body's just done. There's nothing else that they can figure out how to do. And so often what people need in this initial phase is time to rest. They need to give themselves permission to stop for just a little bit. And for these personalities, the idea of stopping and just resting before pushing through to fix it can be the hardest thing for those first 2 to 3 days. And then they're just like, I'm starting to feel like a human again. I can see why I needed this. And so in those early phases, doing a lot of meditation, learning how to meditate, and getting into the breathing and the breath work side of things is where it's a very good place to start. Because breathing, like when you're really stressed out, someone will come up to you and be like, whoa, 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 just breathe. And you'll be like, just breathe. Yeah. Just like irritates you. But it is actually the best advice, because our stress switch is very simple, because we're either stressed or not stressed. We're either with a high blood pressure and a fast heartbeat, or our blood pressure is nice and low and our heartbeat is relaxed. And we're either breathing very quickly or we're breathing slowly. And so unless you're big into biofeedback, the easiest way that we can turn off our stress switch is by slowing down our breathing. And so we can do this by practicing what I call 5-5-5 breathing. And so it's when you slow down and you take 5 deep breaths for 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale. And by doing that, you're signaling your brain, okay, we're relaxing now. I can turn off my stress response. And so in these early phases, what I recommend people do is do this 5 times a day. And I actually recommend people do this all the time, 5 times a day, because our lives are stressful, constantly turning on our stress switch. So if we can just flick it off 5 times a day, then it's really easy to do. And I know 5 times a day sounds like a lot, but if you do it when you first get up in the morning, before each meal, and before you go to bed,
that's 5 times.
That's 5 times. So it's not hard.
And usually, I wanted to ask this before that I forgot. On the second stage, what's the duration do they usually stay on the second stage and before it progress to the third stage? And usually how long do they stay in the third stage before they realize that, oh my gosh, I need help?
So usually once you hit the third stage, it's pretty quick for you to recognize that, oh, I need to do something about this, because it doesn't feel good. It really does not feel good at all.
Especially for a person who keeps going day in, day out, right? Like, there is something wrong.
Exactly. You know that you're now being held back by your body. It's your body's holding you back, and it's not just your ability to push through. As far as how people move through the stage of resistance depends on many factors. It depends on what else you're doing to support your stress response at that time, like with good nutrition, with balanced exercise. Are you keeping up with those beautiful coping strategies that you use, or are those the first things to go? Because usually when we get really stressed, what do we first dump? Our coping strategies. So if you can keep up on those things, that extends the time that you can stay in there. But then it also depends on the kind of stressor that you're experiencing, the amount of other stressors that are in your life, your ability and your skills to be able to overcome the mindset of all of those. So there's many different factors that can play into that. But then the more you're aware of your body and what it feels like in the stage of resistance, you'll be able to catch those early stages that are showing like, okay, I'm slipping over the edge a little bit. I need to look at what I can streamline in my life to make it easier so I can prioritize the things that are mattering most right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's often what we try and do, right? Like we get something new and we're just like, okay, I'm going to add that onto the list, but we don't either get rid of something else or simplify something else.
No.
So now we're just like adding on, adding on, adding on
We can do it
without,
all.
right? I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not sustainable. So we need to
Yeah.
figure out a way to simplify things. And we're in this age of beautiful technology where there are so many ways we can simplify our lives. We just have to start opening up to them and using them.
And I think one of the more common responses is, "Oh, it's normal. Everybody gets that." I have digestive issues. You have digestive issues too. So it's like kind of normalized in a sense. Do you get that too?
Absolutely. And we just see that as like, okay, so we just have that. I take a pill for that. It's fine.
Oh yes.
But if you just keep putting a Band-Aid solution on everything, then
Yes.
all of the undercurrent of that awful
Yeah.
stress that's bubbling under there, it's just going to keep getting worse.
Yeah.
And so this is the metaphor that I use often when I talk about this. If you are putting Band-Aid solutions on your stress, it's like you're in a little boat full of holes and you're trying to bail yourself out with a spoon. You're going to sink
yes.
more slowly, but you're still going to sink.
And it's just a spoon there you're holding,
Exactly. Like that's not going to help you very quickly for very long. So
You're still going to sink. Yeah.
You're still going to sink. You
Yes.
still need to address the underlying causes of your stress. And that is our inner critic and our modern day stressful lifestyle that just teaches us to add it onto the pile and try and make it work rather than be like, okay, so if this is coming in, either what's going to go or what's going to be outsourced or what's going to be simplified because I'm only one person. Got to make this work.
Yes, and it's such a huge issue. This is such a huge issue. It's so pervasive, and you're right. It's an epidemic on its own,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we don't talk enough about it. We don't. I mean, what do you do when you're stressed when you were younger, right? And then you just sit around with a bunch of friends, and then let's drown it in alcohol or whatever it is. I think that's so common.
Absolutely. And those are also things that we were taught as kids, not with alcohol, but with food. Like when you were as a child and you had a bad day or your team didn't win the game, did your parents take you out for ice cream? Or did they make your favorite dinner? Did they offer some kind of comfort food? Because we even call it comfort food. So we've been taught to associate celebrations and the need for comfort, connection, and love with food. So all of these things are pre-programmed early. And again, it's just creating awareness and understanding where all of these are coming from in order to make those shifts so that we can start to take control of our body, our stress response, and the course of our lives.
So you would suggest that when a person is going through exhaustion, they would do the 5-5. Excuse me. Then after that, what kind of do you suggest hypnosis generally, or?
Some self-hypnosis is really helpful, but I think before you get into that, you have to understand what led you to this stage of exhaustion in the first place. What are the underlying beliefs and expectations you've been taught to have for yourself that have created this space that you need to then push until you tip over the edge and hit exhaustion? So going back to our self-talk and belief origin stories to learn, where did this start? Like, where did this first belief show up and how has that been playing out in my life and how do I want to change that? Because that's where the meditation is great for like a quick fix, but it can very much be a Band-Aid solution if you don't fix what you're trying to treat with meditation. And so that's where learning those extra strategies to understand where those belief systems have started is really important. So for me, growing up, I remember having this belief that I wasn't very good at communication, that writing and speaking were not my thing, and that I would never be a public speaker. And they're like, haha, look at me now. But at the time...
Exactly. I was like, wow, you really stepped out of that then.
Because I learned how to break it. So when I look back at where this started, it was when I was 6 years old and we were doing this project in the school and I asked the teacher and the parent for help. And I asked it in a funny way, I guess, because they laughed at me. And I'm like, kids say the funniest things, so I get it. And at that moment, I felt so ashamed. I was like, oh, how should I say that differently? Could I have spoken in a different way? Why did I say it wrong? And so then I started to see how that pattern started in that origin moment and moved through my life. And so then all through later school years and into university, I would always get my papers proofread by my family members. And because I didn't trust my ability to communicate. But then I started my nursing program. Our very first lab exam was a communication lab, where we would be going into a room that would be videotaped with an actor designed to test and push our communication skills. And terrifying in its all right on its own for me, but then also after everybody went through, we would be brought into a room together to watch everybody's videos and critique one another on our communication skills. And so like the panic and terror was just like, oh, right there in my heart. And I was just like, oh no, this is going to be awful. So then we're sitting there watching my video, and the teacher is commending me. She's saying like, look, she's maintaining great eye contact. She's nodding her head. She's clearly engaged. She's asking for clarification. She's repeating back the complicated things that she's hearing. She's sharing in an appropriate way to build rapport. She just had nothing but good things to say. And I was just like, hang on a second. Yes. I'm supposed to be bad at this. And so then I decided to do an experiment. And so I wrote my next paper and edited it myself and sent it in. And I've never received such a high mark on my paper. And the TA that was marking it wrote, you have such a wonderful, relatable writing style. It's so easy to read. And I was just like, and just like that core belief was shattered. Because this is how core beliefs work, is those beliefs attract stuff that makes it stronger, and they push away anything that doesn't agree with it. And so I had all of these beliefs and all of these instances growing up that proved that I was bad at communication, and I was not seeing all the moments that I was good at it until that moment where I had no choice but to see that I'm okay. Like I can communicate fairly clearly and in a way that people can relate to. So understanding where that origin story starts from is really helpful, and understanding all of the information you've received up to this point being filtered through that lens, not just, well, this is what I've been proven, so it must be fact, but to understand that beliefs are not fact. They're a filter.
That is so powerful. And because you formed that belief to begin with, you have that power to dismantle that belief next.
Absolutely. So once you've kind of allowed your body to recover, that's when you've got to start uncovering those beliefs that are leading to those stressful responses. So that way you can start to patch all the holes in your boat so you won't keep sinking.
So that's your work then. You help them rest, and then after that you help them discover what brought that on in the first place. So there's understanding involved, and when there's understanding involved, there is healing there and then with that action alone. And then you help them move on to different coping strategies. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I help them identify their coping strategies, because again, the ones that we've been taught may not be the ones that are best for you. So it's getting back in connection with what I call your objective observer. So that's the true self within you that can see everything that happens in your life, everything that's happened in the past with objectivity, and they can decide, does that actually align with my purpose, or does that somebody else's suggestion for what they wanted for my life?
Which is what believers belong.
Yes, exactly. And I can't remember who said it, but there was a quote that was like along the lines of, don't listen to what everybody else has planned for your life, because they don't have much planned for you. No. Because everybody's the hero of their own story. They're really focused on them. And so you need to be your own hero, not a supporting character.
Yes. In our own life.
Yes.
That is so powerful. And well, it's been so great to listen from you, all these perspectives on stress. And I'm just, the research that you brought on, that was just so amazing. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation about perspective and beliefs all at the same time. My last question for you is really, is there something that you want to say to someone who's going through a lot of stress right now, who are recognizing this symptoms as we're talking, who's listening in, and what do you want to say to them? Is there anything you want to say to them?
So the most important thing that you can do right now, if you are having a lot of stress, you're feeling overwhelmed, is to find people that understand you and support you and make you feel like you belong. Because when we're in this high stress state for a long period of time, there was another study that I've learned from that they see that our DNA, on the top of each strand of DNA, are these little hats. They're called telomeres. And when we have this prolonged stress, even in a stage of resistance, our body starts to wear down those little caps. They kind of disappear. And then the DNA strands start to unravel. And so what this means is that our DNA is starting to create unnormal cells. So this is commonly known as free radicals, or those cells that we need to eat blueberries for, the antioxidants. But what this research has shown is that if you're in this high stress state and you reach out to people and just connect with someone that can just listen, they don't have to have any training, they don't have to have any facilitation or being able to fix it, they just have to hear you. You just have to feel heard and understood. And what your body does is it rewinds up those strands of DNA, and the caps, the telomere caps, regrow. So by reaching out and getting support, having someone to hear you and to listen is enough to heal your DNA and prevent some diseases like cancer. So if you are stressed right now and you are overwhelmed, reach out, talk to somebody, because that can be so healing for your body as well for your mind.
That is such an amazing research. Another one there. Wow. I mean, our body heals in so many ways. And I mean, this is what science is so amazing, that you can actually see it and put in your logical mind, how these things happen. And my goodness. Okay.
Exactly. And it's like simple stuff. We just have to know how to support our body to be able to do this, because our body is fascinating, this amazing machine. And we just have to know how to support it to be able to do what it can do.
And it will do its work. It has its own intelligence. I mean, that's how people give birth. That's how we heal our cuts and wounds.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Heather. Please let people know where can they look for you. What's your website? What's your Instagram account? What's your face? And you have a freebie for them, right? You have a PDF that, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at heatherthatcher.com. I have lots of resources on there. There's links to my podcast as well if you resonated with what I was talking about. And there's also links to what's called a stress risk assessment. And so it's what we talked about earlier, where you can go through and look at the different stressors in your recent life, the last 2 years, and you can mark it off and then get a score. And then based on your score, I have suggestions for how you can best support your body to heal from that stress damage. So you can get that. I'll leave the link here so that you guys can get it there and be all set up for that. And then on Instagram, you can find me at the Ultimate Life Survival Guide.
Yes, the Ultimate Life Survival Guide. I saw that stress risk assessment. That is so interesting as well. And for those of you who are wondering, you have that awareness already that you're stressed and you're wondering how does this affect you, go ahead and take that stress risk assessment to get a clearer picture on the steps that you can take right now.
There's lots of really easy, really implementable things, and I link them out to you so you don't even have to go searching for them and make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, and we'll put it down in the show notes. And thank you so much again, Heather, for coming on. Please go and hop on to listen to Heather's podcast. She has great stuff when it comes to this. And yes, stay in touch with Heather as well.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Heather. It's going to help so many people.